Hello and welcome back to Living on the Verge. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about friendships. Not just friendships with friends, but friendships in all of our relationships with our parents, with our children, with our siblings, even with our spouse. And what it really means to have a true friend, a real ride or die. You know what I mean? I don't think we talk enough about how rare that actually is, especially as we get older. And how for some of us, we realize that sooner than expected. One of my sons has a group of friends that he still had from high school. And I just think that it's beautiful that they still get together. They still celebrate one another's wins. They're still there for moments of hardship. And that is a rarity. And I always tell him how lucky he is to have that. I didn't sit down to record this because something dramatic happened. I'm recording it because something has quietly been unfolding in my life. And these quiet realizations are generally the ones that tend to change us the most. So, for me, this topic feels alive right now, really, really open and raw and there. Because I realized that 2025 was the year that I finally understood friendship. And I know that sounds like a huge statement, but it's really difficult to understand what friends are supposed to be in our life. What is their purpose? Because if you think about it, from the time we're little, we have friends in school, and 9 times out of 10, you're arguing with your friend one day, and the next day you want to go spend the night, and the next day so and so is turning this friend against the next. And so we grow up with this kind of distorted view of what friendship truly is. And I haven't been really obsessed or preoccupied with this notion, but little by little, I started realizing like who shows up, when they show up, and why they show up. And conversely, who doesn't show up, when they don't show up, and why aren't they showing up, right? And so it really got me into this very purposeful, thoughtful process where I started kind of just thinking through all my years of the various friendships, starting from when I was a little girl until current day, and kind of just evaluating what does that mean and how do I define friendship? And that's kind of how this episode was born. So let's talk first about the relationship that we have with our parents. And I don't know about you, but I grew up in a time where I was told by my parents that children were meant to be seen and not heard. And I can't tell you how many times, whether it be in the midst of an argument, probably one that I was winning, if I'm being honest, or because I was being, a brat and not doing what I was supposed to do, that one of my parents would say, I'm your parent, not your friend. And I always remember that kind of stinging. Like, I think I had enough sense of reason and rationale to figure out that these characters in my life were important guides, and that in fact they were supposed to teach me and I was supposed to listen to them. But I always also saw them as friends. And to me, back then, friendship was binary, right? You're either my friend or you're my enemy. And so it was weird to me that my parents, were so adamant about getting across the idea that they were not my friends. And having had raised my children now, I understand the idea, and I'm quite certain I probably said it to my own kids too. But I hope that I did one thing a little differently. I hope that I modeled that in times of real need, I could be a friend to my children. You know, if you were going through a breakup, or if you had just lost a job, or wrecked your car, or gotten a terrible grade in school, I always tried to parent from the angle of I'm this person's guide, but they really need a friend right now, too. And I'm sure I didn't always succeed, but it was always in my mind, given the relationship slash friendship that I had with my parents. And that's not to say that I didn't enjoy my parents, or that we didn't have fun times and laughs or anything like that. It's just that my mom was a young mom, and I think that that's the only way she knew how to parent, right? Iron fist. And then that's just what they did. That's what they were shown. That's what they did with us. My dad didn't have a lot of guidance growing up. So I think, especially having girls, he was really concerned with making sure that we went down the right road. And he wasn't harsh, he was just strict. And so the notion of sitting there chatting with my dad about, problems I was having with my boyfriend or whatever, that was never a thing. Now, let's fast forward to today. I could pretty much talk to my dad about anything. And I think the same could be said about my mom, because, we're in a different place in life. But it's just a lesson in you become a product of what raised you. And so you either continue down that, avenue, or you stop the process and you create a family dynamic and a way of raising yourself and your children in a way that honors the things that you love and appreciated about your parents and how hard they tried, but recognizes that they weren't perfect, and so you make cognizant, intentional shifts to do things a little bit differently, right? And so I think that for me, my friendship with my parents wasn't all that I wanted it to be. But then again, I was the oldest sibling, so I parented my siblings a lot. And therefore, I came across as very parental myself, which when I think about it, having young parents, that must have been hard, because I was a little pistol. I had an opinion about everything. I challenged everything. And I'm sorry to say it, Mom and Dad, but I was right about some things too. And I had to be wrong just because you guys were the adults. And that did not fare well. And it led to some years of anger in, my teenage years. And it led to me wanting to do everything completely the opposite when I had my own children, until I realized that not everything they did was wrong. They did their best. They loved us so very much. And there were some real pearls of wisdom that I have taken away from my parents. So everybody has a different relationship with their parents. I know that there are people I know that are friends with their parents and whose parents raised them as if they were friends. And now that has caused a different kind of animosity and resentment, because now the adult is saying, I don't know how to parent because you never parented me. And that's kind of, another kind of a problem to have. It's the same but different, but it's still so indicative of how important identifying the degree of friendship that you have with your parents and how you want to be a friend to your child. I mean, all of that kind of works together. And it just made me realize that friendship isn't just about friends. And so when we were younger, we think about friendship as something separate from family, right? But as life goes on, friendship becomes less about labels and more about how it feels to be with someone. So today I want to talk about the different kind of friendships, and I want to start off with friendships with your children. And to me, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is when your adult children still like you, in spite of you, in spite of how many times you screwed up raising them, how many mistakes you made, they still like you. And it's even better if they really like you. They don't just tolerate you, they admire you. They want to spend time with you. I have that. And I'm so grateful that each of my 4 boys make an effort to reach out to me. I am one of the first people that they want to call when they have good news. And I am one of the first people that they turn to when they are going through something. And that is to this day. And my oldest is 37 and my youngest is 25. And I am so blessed to be able to say that out loud and know that it's true, because I just had lunch with one of my kids a week or so ago. I'm having dinner with another one in a week. My other kid just called me over the weekend with really exciting news about what's going on in his life. My other son called me midweek out of the blue just to hum a tune to me and find out if I could name that tune, because there was a song that was rolling around in his head that he knew I would know. And that is a beautiful thing to me. And so at some point when you're raising your children, I mean, we love them to pieces, right? We love our kids. We want to take care of them. We want to make sure they have everything. We want to make sure they grow up to be good people and contributing humans to society. But at some point, each of your children, and you know what this is for you, and if you're the child, you may even know what this point was when it shifted for you with your parent. At one point, your love for your child shifts and becomes a sort of awe-filled respect. You know, when I look at my kids, they're not perfect. Nobody is. But I just have this, I mean, every parent has a sense of pride, of course, but I just have this awe-inspired sense of respect for my children because they're genuinely good human beings. And that just means everything to me. And the fact that we can have spirited conversations and respectfully agree to disagree, or, you know, if something comes up, it'll instantly cue me to think of one of my children. And in that moment, I'm not thinking about them like, oh, I really want to tell so-and-so this. No, it's, I can't wait to tell my friend this. They will really appreciate it. And that is so special and so amazing to me. But there's the other side, because when you are friends with your children and they do share their life with you, it's really hard to toe that line between friend and parent as an adult, because there's that point when listening kind of matters more than directing. And as parents, we have to teeter on the line and go, God, I really want to tell you not to quit that job, but I know that you're going to have to do what you need to do. And I'm also not going to be the parent that's going to tell you, I told you so, when you tell me in 2 months, I really wish I hadn't quit that job. And that's friendship, guys. That's not parenting, right? We support our friends. We're honest with them and we tell them when we don't think things are in their best interests. But at the end of the day, we want what's going to make them happy. So we're going to support them. And we're certainly not going to be the I told you so people when they come back later to us. So what my friendship with my children looks like now and how it's different than before is that I am able to be honest and let them know when I'm having a rough day. I don't have to be perfect because I know that they know I'm human too. They recognize that I've made mistakes. Hell, I raised them. They know I made mistakes. But my point is, they see me as the mortal that I am. And so it allows me to be more real, to say, hey, you know what? I really wish I could do this, but I can't do that anymore. And it's okay because I know that they're going to love me through it, mainly because I'm their mom, but also because they like me as a person and I'm their friend. And they would extend that grace to any friend because all of my boys are really good friends. But one of the trickiest parts about being friends with your adult children is realizing that listening matters more than directing. And I just had an occasion to practice this muscle in my adult friendship memory bank this last weekend. One of my kids called me very excited about an opportunity and really knew what they wanted to do, but just wanted to hear themselves process it. And I knew in that moment that I was facing some really important milestone. This person was reaching out because they trust me and they value my opinion. And even though I'm their mom and they know that at any moment I could switch to mom hat, they trusted that I was going to listen with my heart and give them advice as a friend with the protection of Mama Bear, kind of built in for good measure. And that is the hardest part, to be honest with you, because I knew in that moment that if I said the wrong thing, as I have had opportunities with others of my children, I know that there's this one inflection point that if I say the wrong thing, the next time I'm not going to be the phone call. And sometimes all they want to do is hear themselves process it with you on the other end of the phone. And that's when the idea of listening matters more than directing. Our parenting days with our adult children are never really over, but we have to recognize at some point that we have guided them and they are on their own. They are on their way. They are taking all of the lessons that we gave them and putting them into practice. And as parents, we need to trust that they're good enough people to make the right choices. And we need to be grateful that they still want to share some of those choices with us. And that's kind of how I see that. And that means so much. That says a lot about them as men. And honestly, I'm going to go there. I think it says a little bit about what kind of a parent I was. And so before we get into friendships with siblings, I want to point out one thing that I learned through reading Mel Robbins' book, The Let Them Theory. And I kind of knew this already, but it really stuck with me this time. And so I want to share it with you. There are some important components required in order to maintain friendships. And if you think about it, this could probably be extended to any sort of relationship. But there are 3 key components required. One is proximity. The other is timing. And the third is energy. So as we go through this today, I want you to keep those 3 things in mind and ask yourself how they might be affecting your friendships and your relationships. And if in fact, what I'm saying makes any sense to you at all. So getting back to those friendships with your siblings, I raised my boys, and especially when they were fighting, I would do whatever I needed to do to end the current dispute at hand. And then I would remind them that their parents are going to come and go, their friends are going to come and go, but their siblings are cradle to grave. And they need to nurture and nourish and cherish those relationships and do whatever it takes to fix it, as long as it's within their power. And it's very interesting how this has come to pass in my own life, and we'll talk a little bit about it later. But what I tell you this because it's really, really important for me to share with you how important I think it is for my boys to have a true and honest friendship with one another. And I'm pretty blessed to be able to say 3 of my 4 boys are now married, and all 3 of them have had one of their brothers as their best man and the rest of their brothers in their wedding party. And I can't believe that they would imagine having been able to celebrate such a special moment without their brothers involved. And that doesn't mean that they agree on everything or that they're, constantly like-minded. They are a hilarious group of men when they get together, and we could do a whole podcast just on the personalities of my 4 boys. But I won't do that today. I will, though, just point out that I think that some of my advice might have stuck, right? Because my boys seem to genuinely like each other too. So why is this? Well, there's a real simple reason as to why we would naturally be friends with our siblings, and that's because we have a shared history. We grew up together. In my case, we all grew up in the same bedroom. Me, my brother, my sister, all in one bedroom. And until I was, I was the oldest. And so until I was about maybe 12 or 13, and then I got my own room and they shared a room and so on and so forth. So there's that. There's spending holidays together, going to school together. Everything in your history is relatively similar to that of your sibling. So you're going to have that ability to identify with that person based on that shared history. And naturally, that's going to lead you to a friendship. But what about your shared present? So for context, let me share a little about my relationship with my siblings. I have a sister 6.5 years younger and a brother 8 years younger than I. And my sister and I, as adults, have always been close. Even given the age difference, what happened was I got divorced when I was 30 years old. I got remarried, had another child, and my sister had just gotten married. And so her firstborn and my thirdborn ended up being months apart from one another. They went to school together. They graduated from high school together. And so it afforded us an opportunity to live kind of parallel lives. We owned a business together at one point. And so we had the proximity and the timing was working. We were both living the same kind of lives. And so it didn't take a ton of energy to be friends and to be intertwined in one another's social life, if you will. But as time went by, things started to change. And I have to be honest, for the last, up until 2024, there was about a year and a half, it was about an 18-month stretch where I just could not wrap my head around what had happened with my relationship with my sister. I would try to have lunch. She would cancel. I'd invite her over. She would, say she needed a rain check. I would text her. She would send back an emoji. And I would try to approach her to try to hash it out. But as confrontational as I am, my sister is 180 degrees non-confrontational. So it doesn't work together well at all when it comes to problem solving, but that's neither here nor there for purposes of this story. The moral of the story is, at one point, I finally realized I have done everything that I possibly can to keep this friendship strong and real, and it no longer is. So I need to let it go. And if it comes back, it was meant to be. I know it sounds corny, but it's true. That's kind of how I was finally able to stop mourning the friendship. Now, listen, she's still my sister. She, still came over for Christmas. I will still always consider her a part of my life, but we're not vacationing together anytime in the near future. And there was one point where we thought we would have an annual sisters vacation to Mexico for the foreseeable future. So those moments are no longer, but there's a reason for it. And it's because our timing doesn't work anymore. While my kids are gone and I'm for the most part retired and in my wine drinking and traveling era, she is in the deep throes of her career. She is extremely busy. She works nonstop. She's a single mom. And though the majority of her kids are adults, she does still have one child that is in school and is therefore still dealing with those dynamics, prom, finals, driving, all of those things that are no longer an issue for me. And so the timing in our life is not quite working. And even though the proximity is still there, she lives a few houses down the street, it takes too much energy, I guess, for us to work this friendship. So consequently, we are no longer as close as we used to be. And that made me sad for a really long time, but I'm okay with it now. I am grateful for the time that we had. If it ever comes back, I will welcome it. But I have come to realize that I can only give out energy that is being returned. And as much as I love my sister, she, for whatever reason, was not returning my efforts or my energy. And so hopefully one day that'll change. But for now, my sister is my sister. And I love her as my sister. But to be completely frank, she is not in my friend circle anymore. And I know that I am not in hers. And I have finally come to terms with that. I accept it. And I think that's why I'm able to say this to you on the podcast without any fear of recourse or any repercussions, because I'm speaking the truth, my truth, and it is what it is. What happens when these truths become about your spouse? Let's spend a little bit of time talking about friendship with your spouse. Now, this one's a hard one, you guys, because when you marry your spouse, there's all of these other variables, right? Is this person going to be a good partner? Are we going to have fun? Will we make pretty babies? Am I physically attractive? Do I like the way he or she dances? Whatever. The list of things that are important to us when we're courting is so much different than it is at this stage in life that sometimes we forget that we should be choosing our best friend. Now let's think about this for a second. We don't get to choose our parents. We don't get to choose our siblings. We don't get to choose our children. And they don't get to choose us. The only person in your lifetime that you will get to choose is your spouse. So you better pick carefully, because it's really important that when you choose your spouse, you actually like each other. Not just lust each other, not just think, wow, she's hot, or ooh, he's hot, or, gosh, I can't wait to make babies with this one, or my gosh, this one's really going to take care of me. I can see the Mercedes in my future already. Or, wow, she's going to make the best cookies for my daughter. It's the things that we think about when we can't really see what life is going to look like. And so once you get into the throes of marriage and life and child rearing and mortgage paying and carpooling, you realize liking each other, liking one another is quite important, right? One of the biggest obstacles in my marriage was getting the notion across to one another. We were both just as guilty that we're on the same team. Okay? We are on the same team. It's you and I in this marriage. This marriage is our little biosphere. And when there's a problem, it's our biosphere against the problem. Yes, I've had a lot of years of therapy, and yes, that is therapy speak. But guess what, guys? It's true and it works. If you take the opposite approach when you are in a disagreement with your spouse, then no longer are you friends, but also you are not doing what is best for the marriage. And in marriage, friendship is the glue. When something good happens and the first person you want to call and tell is your husband or your wife, that's your buddy. That's your friend. When you are so excited to share some big news and it has nothing to do with anything your husband or wife would like. It could be, oh my gosh, honey, I just found the best pattern for my quilting. Or, oh my gosh, babe, the best part just came in for my antique truck that I'm rebuilding. Those are the moments that you realize that this person that you chose is your best friend. And so if your spouse isn't your best friend, I encourage you to ask yourself why. Do you not like each other? Are you guys on the opposite team when you're fighting? Look, I don't have it all figured out. Trust me. And one of these days I'll share that whole story with you. But I can tell you that since your spouse is the only person you get to pick, and since we're blessed enough to be able to choose someone to walk through this crazy world with, then why wouldn't we want it to be someone that we genuinely admire and like and would want to be friends with? Because once the, oh my God, he's so hot wears off, at this stage in life, friendship becomes the foundation, not the extra. So I want to move on and I want to talk about the ride or die myth, right? Everybody says, oh my gosh, my friends ride or die, or, oh, I have this one group of friends and they're ride or die, or, oh, you're so lucky you have a group of friends, or that's a ride or die bitch, whatever. We grow up believing that most relationships are deep, mutual, and enduring. But real life has a way of showing us something different. And as we get older, we start to see who shows up, who checks in, who celebrates us without comparison. So let's stop there a second. Who shows up in your life? You know the answers. Take a look around and ask yourself who always shows up to your parties, or who always comes when you need to, move this from one side of the room to the other. Who's the friend that constantly checks in regularly, even if it's just a 2-sentence text, hey, miss you, checking on you? Who is the person that shows up to celebrate you for your wins without having to remind you of theirs? So I think back to early childhood friendships. And recently I had a friend tell me, a group of 3 is hard. And it made me think back to my childhood friends, Carol and Letty. And Carol and Letty were my friends from as long as I could remember. So we're talking, 5 and 6. We lived on the same street. We grew up on a cul-de-sac. Back then we called it a dead end. And we didn't have all of the video games and the telephones, and hell, in my day, you were hard pressed to be able to afford a board game. So when you got done doing your chores and your homework, you went outside and you played with your friends. And that's where Carol and Letty entered my life. Our parents knew each other. Some were social, some weren't. But these 2 were fast friends, and I envied their friendship so much. I wanted so much to have a friendship like them. I spent the better part of my elementary years trying to break into this twosome and make it a threesome. And I was successful at some points. We, hung around together for times off and on. But whenever anything went left, those 2 always closed up ranks, and I was asked out of the equation. And it taught me a lot about solidarity, but it also taught me very early on to not be trustful of friendships because they were not to be depended on. And that kind of stuck with me all the way through and as I started high school and as I became a young adult, I always kept that dynamic in the back of my mind. And it came to pass for me in high school. My best friend at the time, we were really close, and there was another very popular girl who kind of wanted to infiltrate our twosome. And based on the Carolyn Lethe experience, I was like hell bent on making sure that she did not infiltrate our group. And so my high school best friend and I went on to be one another's maid of honors in each other's weddings. She was around for the birth of my first two boys. And then life kind of took us in different directions. She ended up single and pursuing higher education. And I was a mommy raising kids. She was kind of living her wild life and I wasn't. And so, proximity, timing, and energy wasn't serving us at that point. And last I heard, she is happily teaching. She is a college professor. She lives in the Midwest. She is happy as a clam and good for her. I still see her from time to time on Instagram, and she came out to see me a few years back and we had a very nice visit, but it was pretty clear that life had taken us in different directions and that we were kind of more in the cherish our memories phase of our friendship than we were in our let's make new memories together phase. And that was okay too. But it really kind of reminded me that the notion of a ride or die friend is a lot more rare than one thinks, right? Because what about those friends who just disappear when life gets inconvenient or when we change? Now, there is a difference between just sharing your history with someone and then sharing effort, right? So my best friend and I from high school, we shared history. And for years, that was enough to propel us into maintaining a friendship. But as time went on, the effort waned. And therefore, the history wasn't as important because real time and life had gotten in the way and efforts were being put into things that were more important, whether that be for me raising my children or, finding a second career or forging new friendships. And it reminds me of my relationship with my siblings in a way, in that my relationship with my sister is not as close as it once was. And that season for now has passed. But as a result of some changes that I had to go through over the last 3 years, I did become closer with my brother and my sister-in-law. And that was a relationship that was kind of untapped. My little brother has always been super amazing, but never really close to us in proximity, in timing, or in energy. He kind of marches to his own drummer. He recently retired a police officer and, he works like crazy. He still works. He probably works now more than he did before he retired. But anyway, the point is I went through something in my life and he was there and he showed up as a brother because he's my protective baby brother, but also as a friend because I needed him and he knew that. And it made me realize that our proximity didn't have to be such that, he would know what was going on. And the timing sure as shit wasn't convenient. I remember he had to take a day off work at one point just to come and help me. But he was willing to put in whatever energy was required at the time to show me that he was there for me. And that meant everything. So that is a perfect example of availability versus intention, right? And that is important in my current day friendships, sometimes we intend to be together once or twice a week. But most of my friends are grandmas, or they're busy entrepreneurs, or they are philanthropists, and they have things going on, man. So, and as much as our intention is to get together once or twice a week, our availability is such that sometimes it doesn't happen. And then there's a whole different thing. What about those friendships that aren't unhealthy? They're just no longer reciprocal. So, another quick story. I had a friend that took me to Mexico some years back. She was very gracious. We had a great time. It was a very special moment for her in her life. And I remember thinking, I'm not having as much fun as I thought I was going to have. We had looked forward to going away together for years. We had been friends for years. And I thought it was going to be so amazing. And it wasn't bad. It just wasn't amazing. We just kind of didn't vacation in the same way. And so on the morning before the last day, we went out on a hike, and that was something she really wanted to do. And I was a little bit afraid of it, but I gave in to my fears and I went and I did it because it was important to her. And that was the moment that I realized that the friendship wasn't really very reciprocal. It was okay as long as we were doing what she wanted to do. Otherwise, she never once said, what would you like to do? And nothing ever went wrong. There was never any big breakup or anything. But we just haven't been very good friends since then. And I still, of course, celebrate her wins. And, we're still Instagram friends and all of that stuff. But we have absolutely no plans to see one another in the near future. And honestly, when I realize that, it can still sometimes feel like a loss, even when nothing went wrong, right? And so here's the thing. We are relational beings with finite energy. We only have so much to give, but we're pack animals. We're not meant to go through this world alone. We need relationships. We thrive on connection. We always have. But as we get older, our tolerance for shallow, draining, or one-sided relationships gets smaller. Not because we're colder or indifferent, but because we are clearer. And so I want you to ask yourself, how much emotional labor are you having to put into your friendships? I know for me, when I spend time with my friends now, I come away feeling re-energized, refreshed, revitalized, recharged, and ready to do whatever until the next time. And that energy for me is a real resource. It catapults me through the mundane things that, we all have to do, but we don't want to. And in that, I don't want to forget that sometimes we do have to let go of friendships that we know aren't good for us. And the cost of abandoning oneself over the friendship is never worth it. And so if you're coming away from your interactions with your friends feeling unsettled or unhappy, or gosh, I really don't like when she said that, or my God, I had to bite my tongue, or whatever, then ask yourself if that is where you should be spending your time. Ask yourself if it is not time to remove the blur from how you've been envisioning this friendship, and it might be time for you to be done. And that's okay. But I want to talk more about nurturing the friendships that do matter, because real friendships don't maintain themselves by accident. They're fed intentionally, gently, but most importantly, honestly. Before I get started, I want to tell you a story. I had a friend who we were talking about friendships, and this friend just this analogy just really struck me. I use it a lot now. And if you're listening, friend, thank you, because I intend to continue to use it. But they said, I view my friendships as coins. So if you envision a nickel is larger than a dime. So envision a dime and a nickel. My friendships used to be what could fit inside of a nickel. And now my friendships are what can fit inside of a dime. So my circle is much smaller, but my friendships are more valuable. And I know I did not phrase it exactly the same way my friend did, but I'm close enough for you to get the idea. It is not the quantity, it is the quality. And even within that quality, there are certain friendships that will always be treasured and cherished more than others. Because again, they're intentional, they're gentle, and they're honest. So let's talk about what kinds of things it takes to maintain these real, true, treasured friendships. Well, one is consistency. You have to be consistent. And I noticed that when I stopped waiting for friendship to come knock on my door and I just started living my life, I didn't get in the car and go, today I'm going to go look for friends. No, I just started living my life. And consequently, friendships that worked and that were like-minded found me. We found one another. But now that we have, consistency is key. So I've said this once before, I think, on the podcast. It's really important if you have a friend. I have a group of 3 friends and 1 cousin that I like to get together with monthly. And when we get together, before we leave, we schedule our next get together. It gives us something to look forward to, and it contributes to the consistency that is required to maintain and nurture the friendship. And another thing that's really important is small gestures over grand ones. You ever have that friend that on your birthday does this big old long 40, second video on Instagram with all the pictures of all the things you did with them over the last year, and oh, my friend, but that's the same friend that hasn't called to ask what you're doing and doesn't know that everybody's out of town, so you're going to be alone on your birthday? That's the friend that is making the gesture for themselves rather than for you. Because a true friend will always appreciate a genuine small gesture over a grand one. Always. And another thing that a true friend will always allow is the grace for their friend to change and evolve, right? So one of the things that probably has tripped up some of my friendships and relationships in the past is the fact that as people grow and change, there was no latitude for that, whether it be on their part or on my part. And as you get older, you realize that when we know better, we do better. And so as we change and we grow and we evolve, it's important to allow our friends the grace to do that. And of course, we're still going to be honest with them and let them know if we hate the changes they're making, but we're going to let the relationships evolve naturally. Because the truth is that the friendships that last aren't perfect. They're forgiving, they're flexible, and they're real. And so there's one more area I want to talk about, and that is knowing when to let a friendship go. Now, everybody's probably heard the phrase, relationships are meant to either be for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. That's a hard realization if you really think about it, because one of the hardest lessons in life is learning when to release a friendship without villainizing anyone. So when do we do that? Well, when you outgrow the dynamics of the friendship, that's one of the times where nothing went wrong. There was no fight, no bridges need to be burned. It's just you've outgrown one another. Or what about if you just let go without confrontation. That's something I had to practice. I like things all nice and tied up with the bow, and I had to accept that some people do not need that in order to move on. And I also had to realize that just because I don't have a deep friendship with someone doesn't mean that I don't love them anymore. I can love someone without having access to them. And one of the things I learned, it was a tough lesson, but a super valuable lesson, is that not every ending needs an explanation. Sometimes just the awareness is enough. Just that moment, the awakening, that is the lesson. And oh, by the way, not all endings are failures. It is very comforting. It serves as load lifting to me when I hear those things. Sometimes we just outgrow the dynamics. Sometimes it's okay to let go without confrontation. Sometimes we can love someone without access. Not every ending needs an explanation, and not all endings are failures. I know I said it twice, but I feel like it bears repeating because it's powerful. And if you could wrap your head around that, well, hell, you could save yourself a lot of heartache for one thing, but also you could start to maneuver friendships with more ease and without the fear that if it doesn't work out, you've failed. And so maybe this time in life isn't really about having more friends. Maybe it's about having truer ones. And maybe the most important friendships we nurture is the one we have with ourselves. So we stop accepting relationships that require us to disappear. Take some time. Sit with that for a second. And then ask yourself about the three fundamentals: proximity, timing, and energy. How are you using those three things in your friendship? How are your friends using those things with you? And who in your life feels like it's easy? Who feels like effort? Both answers are information for you, my friends. And this, for me, is living on the verge, standing at the edge of what was, honoring it, and choosing clarity over obligation, truth over performance, and relationships that feel like home. Have an amazing day.